Hey, Jim, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm good, John. How are you this afternoon?
Good. I'm great. Jim Lee is the chief of IRS Criminal Division and kind enough to spend some time with us today. I know that you got your staff to accept from the chief a what you've called a BSA challenge, a Bank Secrecy Act challenge, that you've had an opportunity to talk to a bunch of different folks in the broad AML and media communities, and you to talk to our clients and our community as well. So I wanted to kick it off by saying, A, why did you decide this was important? And tell us a bit about the project.
Now, John, hey, first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity here. I greatly appreciate it, as you know, in an effort for your, audience to absorb, some of the metrics that my divisions put together to, really demonstrate and paint that picture of why Bank Secrecy Act data is critical, to law enforcement, and specifically my division that I lead, IRS Criminal Investigation. And I thought this was important. I mean, financial institutions specifically, have wanted a feedback loop, illustrating the importance, of all this reporting that's being asked of them for quite some time. And that's what I really want to talk about. I really consider this the division's, first crack at delivering some of this feedback. So,
Right.
so while I'm going to give you some, quantitative metrics here, kind of illustrating the importance, just as important as I know you have a very large and diverse audience, I just want to make sure that my comments, are heard by all financial crime fighters, but specifically those AML specialists out there in the financial institutions that are really doing this work and producing this BSA data. So I would say, to start, BS and why we did this, other than the continuous feedback loop, BSA data in general, all of it. It's not a nice to have. It's
Right.
a must. It's a must have in an effort to help identify, those individuals that attempt to commit financial crimes, whether it be tax or other. These AML specialists out there in general, they're really the ones that are on like that first line of defense, to detect, this illegal and suspicious activity of financial crimes, where there's a lot of overlap. I mean,
Right.
money laundering is tax evasion in progress. And I always take the time to say that, especially for who I work for. So I thought, look, trying to quantify this and trying to quantify some metrics is so important that I challenged the team here, along with, other subject matter experts, within the division, IRS CI, along with some people from our IRS civil components, FinCEN, and then some private entities, specifically Palantir and Deloitte, kind of that public-private partnership setting, to flush some of this information out that I have. It's just I don't organize it, in a way. So take the metrics that I have, the division has, figure out how we can quantify this somehow, and that's what they did. They took a first of its kind look at how CI, an incredibly user of this BA data, uses it, and they came up with some great measurements. And you might ask me, when you say BSA filings, what are you referring to? And I'm referring to all of it. I'm referring to 8,300 reports, CMIR reports, of course,
Right.
CTRs at a casino, FBARS we're referring to, SARs at banks, money service business, casino. I'm talking about all filings. When we looked at these metrics that I'm going to speak to you about today.
Now, Jim, the metrics go back through fiscal year 2022. So it's a snapshot in time, but it's the most recent snapshot in time. Is that right?
That's right. The way it worked, I've got a visual that I'm going to give to you and your audience. And I mean, it does cover fiscal year 22, but I actually do have averages, over the past couple of fiscal years. And it's just
Okay.
the new technology manipulate data, our own data differently. And that's why I'm able to do this.
Great. So let's talk a bit about that, about investigations that were opened by IRS CI. You talked about that they've what's the percentage that originated from a form, BSA findings related to a primary suspect or subject rather, and then cases that were searched. So give us a sense of what your staff was able to come up with.
Yeah, no, great. So the first first metric that I mentioned, and this is going to demonstrate some significance here. So about 15.8% of all the new investigations that my division put into inventory during fiscal year 22 came directly from or a result of a BSA filing. And I just mentioned, I'm talking all filings. So that metric, that's new inventory, kind of the definition and that's brand new cases, has nothing to do with the stuff I'm already working, but brand new inventory put in, 15.8% came directly from a BSA form. So that is significant, because, and that's why it's a must have. And that's why I can say that with confidence for CI, because that accounts for a huge part of my inventory, and it can't be overstated. Because when you think about how big the Internal Revenue Service is, and this is an enterprise of nearly 80,000 people, right?
Right.
So for context, I only about 5 to 7% of my inventory every year, new inventory year in and year out, comes from main enterprise, in the form of tax and type referrals. So it's a huge number, and your audience might think, well, yeah, but for context, where do your other investigations come from? And I mean, just to give you a little context there, somewhere between 27 and 30% comes from the U.S. Attorney's Office. 27 to 30% is from our other federal law enforcement and partners, who we work with all of them. And then here it is. We've got, about 15 to 16% is the agents, hardworking case agents, just self-development. And then
Right.
you got this other, 15.8 that I'm telling you in fiscal year 22 that come directly from BSA data. So incredibly powerful. I think so that's pretty easy. That's straightforward. That comes directly from the form, right? But one other number I just throw at you that the team found, you're not, when your audience sees a visual, they're not going to see this because it's kind of behind the scenes, but the BSA mission, the Title 31 Bank Secrecy Act mission that we've actually looked at this, and the team came up with another metric. It's pretty interesting the way we look at it. We can actually say in fiscal year 22 that the mission actually accounted for a little bit north of 28% of all new initiations. You might say, well, how do you get that number? Well,
Okay.
I just explained to 15.8. That's direct.
Mm-hmm.
But think about in addition to that, to make up the difference between the 15.8 and the 28%. We have these financial accident review teams out there. And they identify targets during their review, in all the districts that we're in, and case development projects that they have within their respective AORs. So think about the difference would be they're on these review teams. They might start going down a path or following a lead. Maybe we might target an individual where a form should have been filed but wasn't. So somehow they're circumventing the financial institutions. I tie that to the BSA mission. Think about, we identify a target, maybe one of those 15% that I'm talking about, mm-hmm. and maybe there's a co-conspirator that was identified that doesn't have a filing on them. That's part of that 28%. Or just think of any Title 31 investigation, that my team, might initiate after an investigation has already been ongoing. I tie that to the BSA mission. So that's how I make that leap to the to that 28%.
You mentioned what we know as the SAR activity review teams, and I think there are, based on your chart, there's 92 of them that you folks participate or lead in all of them. Just a quick anecdote. I'm very familiar with the Northern Virginia SAR review team because Steve Gerdak, who's a strong supporter, Steve,
Yep.
he has for years invited your folks, HSI, state and local, all sorts of law enforcement types to participate in a once a month meeting where they bring in somebody to talk about a particular issue, whether it's crypto or ransomware, whatever the issue is, and invites the private sector. So we get to come to those conversations, but we come after your peers and colleagues from law enforcement and these other agencies actually look through the SARs that were filed for that particular month. So we are well aware of the direct viewing and utilization of SARs here locally, and I'm sure that goes on in these other review teams nationwide. But it's a good example, I think, to our community, meaning the private sector community, of the value proposition that your folks do the review of the data, do utilize it. I mean, you're telling us this with the chart, of course, but we've seen it firsthand. So I think that's important to mention as well. The fact that IRS CI leads or participates in all of the 92 SAR review teams nationwide. So wanted to go back to that. Obviously, that's extremely important. As I mentioned, the Northern Virginia one has shown us up close and personal how valuable the data is, but also the importance of private-public partnership, the fact that they invite folks from the private sector to come in and share information on issues broadly, whatever the key themes are. So I think those SAR review teams are pretty important to the mission, right?
Yeah, boy, I'm glad you said that. And I couldn't agree with you more. So, yeah, we do lead or co-lead on all of them in the 92 and 94 districts. And you hit on something there. Couldn't agree more. So this BSA data, and these review teams, it's not only significant because it's such a huge part of my inventory, as I mentioned earlier, but it's also significant due to those public-private partnerships and relationships that are either maintained, strengthened, or formed, with our law enforcement partners and the private sector where it's appropriate. So I think the message is, and what should we remember is we're talking to each other, and it's really powerful.
Right.
So couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, that's the important part, right? It's not just the IRS review of BSA data, but you're working with your partners. And I think sometimes people get the wrong impression that the U.S. attorneys, IRS, that they don't work together, that there's competition. There might be competition high level, but you do work together, and that's important for the AML professional to know, right?
I think that's 100%. I mean, when I sit in a room of public-private partners, including our law enforcement counterparts, I mean, nobody sitting in that room can do this job alone. I mean, we all have, diverse skill sets that we bring to the table, and that's when it's really powerful when we're all working together to fight these financial crimes.
The challenge also came up with some metrics on the sentencing of those convicted, and also another important part of this is asset seizures. You want to talk a bit about those?
Yeah. So I think I've got to set that up just ever so slightly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about, I gave you the 15% earlier. Another way we kind of manipulated, this is another data set. Okay. So talked about the direct source. But when we looked at all of my new inventory, in fiscal year 22, about 84.2% of that, okay, all new inventory. The primary target had a BSA filing associated with them. So we might not have opened the case because of a form, but it's just an interesting metric that my team came up with, kind of making us think, hey, are we looking at this data the right way? I mean, how is it that 84% of my targets that we numbered in fiscal 22 have a form, but we're really only sourcing directly from BSA data about 15%. So that's something we're taking away and going to look at it because it's significant. And when I talk about these program areas, I'm talking about, tax violations and other crimes, money laundering, bank secrecy, narcotics, public corruption, terrorist finance, the list goes on. So I think that's important. And, it's obviously, it's also important to know that, we partner every day with our domestic and international, federal, state, local, county law enforcement counterparts, involving complex, financial transactions. But to get to your point directly, there's another data set that we looked at. Okay. Because again, I've got all this data. I mean, here at the IRS, I've got metrics from metrics from metrics. It's just the way that we manipulate it, right? So another data set we looked at was about 83.6% of all those investigations that we recommended for prosecution in fiscal year 22 believe it or not, had a related BSA filing. And I said, oh, geez, okay, well, what's that the past 3 years? And so I looked at that the past 3 years. Everybody that we recommended for prosecution, regardless of the financial crime that we were looking at, so when I look at an average of the past 3 years, it's pretty darn close. 83.2% of investigations we recommended for prosecution over the last 3 fiscal years had a primary subject with a related BSA filing. And again, simply just another data set, drilling down. And then to get to your point directly, of that 83% of recommended prosecutions over the past 3 fiscal years, about 40% of those, of that data set, made it all the way through the judicial system to a conviction. And so here's where you get to your question.
Right.
Of that smaller data set, the number of those cases the average sentence was about 38 months in prison. That data set, it was about 225 million in assets forfeited, about 256 million in restitution ordered by the courts. So pretty significant. And then obviously, we have this huge seizure amount there. And that was a couple of those big seizure cryptos, that we were involved in, just this past year. But again, it just demonstrates we're manipulating these metrics to kind of to be able to demonstrate to the BSA community, AML specialists specifically, that this information is important. And this is kind of a first of its kind look, 'cause I've never came out this strong. With direct stats or metrics to actually demonstrate it.
No, it's very impressive, and I do think that the AML community does welcome the feedback. We get some from FinCEN through their data sets. It used to be called the SAR review, SAR activity review, and now they do some version of that. But to come from the various agencies like yours, I think is extremely valuable. Plus, your message is clear, right? That this is being done through the valued partnership with the private sector, that the information that they're sending in is getting reviewed, utilized. And I think, again, your statistics certainly make that very, very clear. I want to ask you, part of the thing that you're most proud of, besides the value of all this, is that FinCEN has recognized IRS CI with their Director's Law Enforcement Award a number of times. And that's obviously important. Both because you want that, I'll call it sort of high level feedback to your agents and your analysts that what they're doing is valuable and useful and successful, but also that it's getting recognized outside the agency. So that has to be important to your mission.
Again, you're right. Of course, and I'll just add on to my 100% agreement with you. We've actually been, through fiscal year 22, we've been awarded with the FinCEN Directors Award 11 times since that FinCEN's inception of the program in 2015. So, one might say, not really a quality or quantitative metric. It simply further demonstrates the importance of BSA data to my team of financial crime fighting experts. But to go back just a step of what I said before, it's also incredibly important for the morale of the financial investigators and AML specialists in industry as well, because teams receive these awards, simply demonstrating again that not only is simply demonstrating the information is critical to law enforcement and criminal investigations, regardless of what federal law enforcement agencies conduct an investigation. I work for I lead CI, so of course I'm biased to CI, but this is just critical information to financial crimes, and FinCEN does a nice job recognizing public and private in those awards.
Yeah, I think that's important. I know that the number of institutions have received the private sector awards from FinCEN as well. They are not able to disclose who those institutions are, which makes sense because you don't want anyone out there knowing which institutions have, filed SARs or done the work. But still, I know that those institutions really appreciate that recognition. As you said, so do your team. your agents. That's all really, really important. So going forward now, you're going to update the statistics going forward. So you got a baseline now, obviously. So that's important. This feedback is extremely valuable, obviously, to ongoing support from all utilizers, filers, users of the data, and all of that. What are the things that you're looking to do in 2023 regarding this, besides more metrics and information? What your outreach has been pretty phenomenal. Other outreach events? Do you have other things scheduled yet, or things you're thinking about for the remaining part of 2023 that the AML community could be watching for?
Well, yeah, we're really involved all over the country in a lot of these events. I mean, clearly we do a lot. We do a lot with you, sir. ACAMs, AML forums in general. I'll go out to a casino forum, AML casino forum here later in the year. Looking at these metrics, though, this isn't a one and done thing for us.
Right. Mm-hmm.
We've already got we've gotten some good feedback from financial institutions and some easy metrics that we can just manipulate a little bit. I'm going to come out and be able to, these percentages I'm giving you, I'm going to be able to break that down. Well, how many of these cases are tax versus non-tax? I'm going to be able to break that down. Like, what are the major program areas you're talking about? I'm going to be able to tell you, well, out of this percentage, out of this number, this number was related to crypto. This number is related to narcotics. As well as the other thing that I can do, again, I could do it manually now, but we're trying to get our technology to help us here. One of the things I'm going to be able to do is take these statistics I'm giving you and tell the financial industry, how many of those are CTRs and 8300s and FBARs, so there's a lot we're thinking about. I see this as not a one and done. I'm going to continue down this road. I envision multiple phases, and as we talk to the community and the financial industry, they're going to give us feedback and say, yeah, you know what, I hadn't thought about that. Let me see if I can manipulate this data this way. So lot to come there as far as, is what we're going to do with this particular challenge. I envision multiple phases to this. So
that's great, Jim. And your challenge also mentions that there were more than 1.8 million times that investigative personnel searched BSA filings. So obviously that's you're constantly utilizing this. So that can't be emphasized enough. Let me get you out of here on this. We're in the beginning part. We're in January 2023. All sorts of financial crime challenges we've had in the past several years, from PPP loan fraud to ransomware. Obviously, crypto challenges have been massive. Besides all of those, obviously, what do you see as the big challenges, both for IRS CI and your partners in the private sector? What sort of things should we be looking for in terms of financial crime going forward?
Yeah, you mentioned a few of them there already that I think are going to be, at least from my seat and my perspective, there's going to be a lot in that crypto space. And I feel, in this, advancements in technology is a good thing. I think everybody would agree with that. Certainly, my message is advancement in technology is good. But you do have a small fraction there. People are going to try to take advantage of it when it comes to crypto. But I think, large part is it's a good thing. But I think what you're going to start seeing is more of these crypto cases. And I'm starting to see a shift in crypto tax cases. 3 years ago, it was all crypto money laundering charges. I'm seeing a little bit of shift in my inventory now where about half of it is related to tax. So I expect to see more of that. Wow. I expect to see more, and this is here now, but I expect to see more in the international financial crime front. I've talked to you before, and maybe I can come back sometime and talk about our Joint Chiefs of Global Tax Enforcement. We refer to it as the J5. We're going to have we're going to have a lot of international operational announcements here, in the very near future. So I see that, professional enablers, that's still going to be out there. I'm always interested in that. I mean, these are the folks that are oftentimes helping the people without the professional enablers. You know, a lot of times these complex financial schemes, which we're really good at unraveling, you can't do that without, you know, this professional enabler community. So I envision a lot in that space as well. So I kind of think of it as, you know, it's something that we started with. When you sit in a room with a bunch of law enforcement officers and private industry, regardless of the industry, you know, none of us in that room, I say this almost every time, can do it and be successful without working with somebody else. And we all know it. So the more we embrace that public-private partnership, the better off we're going to be. And I also like to say, in a globally connected world, we can't afford not to work together if we want to have an impact on those committing financial crimes, because there's no borders and people can manipulate the system and move money faster than they ever have because of the technology that's out there. So it's really that kind of global problem requires a global solution. And when we work together, it makes that world just a really small place for these criminal actors to try to facilitate these financial crimes.
It's a good way to close this out. Jim Lee, IRS CI Chief, really do appreciate both spending the time today to walk us through some of this, but more importantly, the work that you and your agents do with the private sector. It's clear that you do embrace the partnership, and that's so important, as you're right. We can make the world a little smaller for financial crime and terrorist financing and all the other issues that we grapple with on a regular day-to-day basis. And it's just so important that we better understand one another. You know, what do you need from us? What do we need from you? And this feedback is tremendous. So, Jim, thank you so much for doing this. And we will definitely do some further conversations on some of these other issues that you've alluded to or mentioned today. But thanks so much, Jim. We appreciate the time, and we will talk again soon.
Thank you, sir, for the opportunity. And thanks to all those AML specialists out there.